Hi, I'm Zoe. 22 candles flickered on my birthday cake when my dad leaned over and whispered words that shattered everything I thought I knew about our family. "Your sister is my real pride and joy," he said, so quietly only I could hear. The room kept celebrating around us, but something inside me broke that night. What I discovered next about my family's golden child would change everything, and the silence I'd kept for years was about to explode in ways I never imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The thing about birthday parties is that they're supposed to be about you, right? Your day, your moment, your chance to feel special for just a few hours. But standing there in our dining room, surrounded by balloons and streamers in my favorite shade of purple, watching everyone laugh and take pictures, I felt more invisible than I had in months. The Mountain View Bistro had been closed for the evening so Dad could host my party there. It was a generous gesture, the kind that looked perfect from the outside. The restaurant had been Mom's dream, and now it was Dad's legacy project, the crown jewel of his little empire in Riverside. Fairy lights draped across the exposed brick walls, casting everything in a warm amber glow that made everyone look like they belonged in a magazine spread about perfect families. Chloe stood near the window, radiant in a flowing emerald dress that complemented her auburn hair perfectly. She had this way of commanding attention without even trying, drawing people into her orbit like she was the sun and everyone else just planets spinning around her brilliance. Even at my birthday party, I watched as guests naturally gravitated toward her, hanging on her words as she told some animated story about her latest photography exhibition in Denver. "Zoe, honey, come take a picture with your sister," Mrs. Cross called out, holding up her phone with that eager expression adults get when they think they're capturing a precious memory. I forced a smile and moved toward Chloe, who immediately wrapped her arm around my shoulders and pulled me close. "There are my beautiful girls," Dad said, appearing beside us with his camera. Marcus Harper was the kind of man who wore success well. Tall, silver-haired, with the confident smile of someone who'd built something from nothing. People in Riverside respected him, looked up to him. The restaurant was thriving, his real estate investments were paying off, and he had two daughters who, from the outside, seemed to adore him. "Say cheese, birthday girl," Chloe whispered in my ear, her voice warm with the kind of affection that made me feel guilty for every complicated emotion I carried about her. The camera flashed, capturing what I'm sure was a lovely image of the Harper sisters. What it couldn't capture was the weight I'd been carrying for 3 years, the feeling that I was always performing in my own life, playing the role of the grateful younger daughter who was thrilled to live in her sister's shadow. After the photos, I found myself by the dessert table, mechanically cutting slices of the chocolate cake Dad had ordered from the bakery downtown. It was beautiful, decorated with delicate sugar flowers that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. But it wasn't the cake Mom used to make, the slightly lopsided confections she'd bake from scratch, sneaking extra chocolate chips when she thought no one was looking. 22 looks good on you, kiddo," Dad said, appearing at my elbow. He had this habit of materializing when I was lost in thought, like he could sense when I was drifting away from the carefully constructed happiness he expected from his family gatherings. "Thanks, Dad." I handed him a slice of cake, watching as he took a bite and nodded approvingly. "Your mother would have loved this party," he said, and something in his tone made me look up. There was a wistfulness there, but also something else. Something that felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced saying the right thing about Mom at family events. "She would have made the cake herself," I replied before I could stop myself. His expression flickered, just for a moment. "Well, yes, she did love her baking." He paused, glancing around the room at our guests. "But she also would have wanted you to have the best of everything. That's what we're doing here, Zoe. Giving you the best." I wanted to tell him that the best would have been having her here, but that conversation never went anywhere good. Dad didn't like dwelling on sadness, preferred to focus on moving forward, building something positive from what remained. It was admirable, in theory. In practice, it often felt like we were supposed to perform gratitude for a life that sometimes felt hollow at its center. "I should check on the guests," I said, but before I could move away, he caught my arm gently. "Zoe." His voice was lower now, more serious. "I want you to know how proud I am of you. College, your grades, the way you've handled everything since Mom passed. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." The words should have felt good. They were the kind of thing every daughter wants to hear from her father. But something about the way he said it, the careful construction of the compliment, made it feel like he was checking off a box on an invisible list. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." He smiled and patted my shoulder before walking away to mingle with the other guests. I watched him go, noting how he moved through the room with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly how to make everyone feel welcome, how to be the perfect host. The party continued around me in waves of laughter and conversation. Blake, Chloe's fiancé, had arrived late from his law firm, still wearing his expensive suit and looking every bit the successful attorney he was becoming. He kissed Chloe's cheek, and she lit up like Christmas morning, the two of them settling into the kind of effortless couple dynamic that made everyone around them smile. "When's the big day?" asked Grant Stevens, Dad's business partner, raising his wine glass toward the happy couple. "October," Chloe replied, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured. "We're thinking a small ceremony up at the lake house, nothing too elaborate." Nothing too elaborate for Chloe still meant something that would probably cost more than most people's cars, but she had a way of making even her privileges sound modest and charming. I found myself studying the interactions, the way people responded to her versus how they responded to me. When Chloe spoke, people leaned in. When I contributed to conversations, I got polite nods and quick transitions to other topics. It wasn't malicious, exactly. It was just the natural order of things in our family ecosystem. The cake ceremony came next, everyone gathering around as I made my wish and blew out the candles. The room erupted in applause and someone started singing Happy Birthday, voices layering over each other in that slightly off-key way that happens at every birthday party everywhere. "What did you wish for, honey?" Aunt Patty asked, Mom's sister who'd driven down from Denver for the celebration. She was one of the few people who still looked at me like she really saw me, not just the role I played in the family narrative. "Can't tell you, or it won't come true," I replied with a smile, though the truth was I hadn't made a wish at all. I'd stood there, surrounded by all these people who cared about me, and my mind had gone completely blank. As the evening wound down, guests began gathering their things and saying their goodbyes. The restaurant slowly emptied until it was just family and a few close friends helping with cleanup. I was stacking plates in the kitchen when I heard Dad and Chloe talking in the dining room, their voices low but not quite low enough. "The Denver exhibition went better than expected," Chloe was saying. "The gallery owner wants to discuss representation." "That's fantastic, sweetheart. I always knew your talent would take you places. It's scary though, you know, taking that leap. You've got everything it takes, the vision, the drive, the intelligence." I've never doubted that for a second. I paused in my plate stacking, something about the warmth in his voice catching my attention. It was different from how he'd spoken to me earlier, less measured, more genuinely enthusiastic. "I just want to make you proud, Dad. You already do. Every single day." I set the plates down carefully, trying to make sense of the hollow feeling that was spreading through my chest. It was the same conversation we'd had earlier, conceptually, but the energy was completely different. When he talked to Chloe, there was this lightness, this joy that seemed to bubble up from somewhere deep inside him. More guests filtered out, leaving their thank yous and birthday wishes at the door. Mrs. Cross hugged me tightly and told me I was growing into such a lovely young woman, the kind of thing neighbors are supposed to say but that somehow felt genuine coming from her. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered in my ear, and for a moment I felt the sharp sting of missing Mom so acutely it took my breath away. Finally, it was just our family left in the restaurant. Chloe and Blake were finishing up the last of the decorations, while Dad totaled up the evening's expenses at his usual table by the window. I was wiping down tables, falling into the rhythm of closing duties I'd performed hundreds of times over the years. "Zoe, leave that," Dad called out. "It's your birthday." I'll have the staff handle it tomorrow. But I kept cleaning, needing something to do with my hands, some way to process the strange mix of gratitude and emptiness that had been building all evening. The party had been lovely, people had been kind, I'd received thoughtful gifts and genuine well wishes. So why did I feel like I was watching my own life from outside, like I was an actress playing the role of the birthday girl instead of actually being her? "Dad, I think we got everything," Chloe announced, returning from the back room with Blake close behind. "The restaurant looks perfect." "You two don't need to stay," Dad replied, not looking up from his paperwork. "I know you have an early morning." "Are you sure? We don't mind helping with the rest." "Go on. Zoe and I can finish up." I watched this exchange while continuing to wipe down tables, noting the easy warmth between Dad and Chloe, the way he seemed to anticipate her needs, and she seemed to understand his. They had this natural rhythm, like they spoke the same language fluently, while I was still learning basic vocabulary.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Blake kissed Chloe goodbye and shook Dad's hand, thanking him for the lovely evening. Then it was just the three of us, the way it had been for most of my growing up years, especially after Mom died. "Come sit with me, birthday girl," Dad said, patting the chair beside him. "Let's talk about your presents." I'd received the usual assortment of gift cards, books, and clothes from various guests, but Dad's gift had been the standout, a brand new laptop for my final year at Denver State, top of the line and probably worth more than I made in a summer of part-time work. "It's too much, Dad. Really." "Nonsense. You need good equipment for your studies. Besides," he smiled, "you only turned 22 once." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the restaurant settling into the quiet that comes after a crowd disperses. The fairy lights were still on, casting their warm glow across the empty tables, making the space feel intimate and slightly magical. "I'm proud of you, you know," Dad said suddenly, his voice softer than usual. "I know I don't always say it enough, but I am." "You said that earlier." "I know. But I want to make sure you really hear it." He turned to face me fully. "You're a good daughter, Zoe. Responsible, hardworking, never any trouble." That means something. The words hung in the air between us, and I found myself searching his face for something I couldn't quite name. There was affection there, certainly. Care. But there was also something that felt distant. Like he was looking at me through a lens that kept everything slightly out of focus. "Thanks, Dad." I started to stand, ready to finish the cleanup and head home, when he reached out and caught my wrist gently. "Zoe, wait." He glanced toward the kitchen where Chloe was presumably getting her purse, then leaned closer to me. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the quiet restaurant, every word was crystal clear. "Your sister is my real pride and joy." The words hit me like ice water. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard, waiting for him to clarify or correct himself. But he just looked back at me with this strange, almost relieved expression, like he'd finally said something that had been weighing on him. "What?" The word came out as barely a breath. He glanced toward the kitchen again, then back at me. "I love you both, of course, but Chloe, she's everything I hoped for in a daughter. The talent, the ambition, the way she carries herself in the world. She's going to do something important with her life." My mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Around us, the restaurant continued its quiet settling, the fairy lights twinkling obliviously, the clean tables gleaming under their warm glow. "I'm telling you this because I think you need to understand your place in this family," he continued, still in that careful whisper. "You're loved, absolutely. But you need to stop trying to compete with something you can't match. It's not fair to any of us. Ready to go, Dad?" Chloe's voice rang out from the kitchen doorway, bright and cheerful, and completely unaware of the bomb that had just detonated at table 6. "Absolutely, sweetheart," Dad replied, his voice immediately returning to its normal volume and warmth. He stood up, straightening his jacket as if nothing had happened. Zoe, you can ride with us or take your own car, whatever you prefer. I sat there frozen, watching him transform back into the loving father who'd hosted my birthday party, who'd given thoughtful speeches and expensive gifts, who'd made sure everyone felt welcome and celebrated. It was like watching someone slip on a mask so perfectly fitted that you questioned whether you'd ever seen their real face at all. I'll take my own car, I managed, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. Of course. Drive safely, honey. And then they were gone, Chloe chattering about the success of the evening as their voices faded toward the parking lot, leaving me alone in the restaurant with the fairy lights and the lingering scent of chocolate cake and the echo of words I couldn't quite believe I'd actually heard. I sat there for a long time after they left, staring at the table where my birthday cake had been, trying to process what had just happened. The restaurant felt different now, less magical and more like a stage set where I'd been performing in a play I didn't fully understand. Your sister is my real pride and joy. The words repeated in my head like a song stuck on loop, each repetition making them feel both more real and more impossible. Had he really said that? Had my father on my birthday leaned over and whispered that his other daughter was his favorite? I pulled out my phone and stared at it, thumb hovering over Aunt Patty's contact information. She'd given me a long hug earlier, told me to call her anytime. But what would I even say? That my dad had just shattered my understanding of our family with a single whispered sentence? That I felt like I'd been living a lie for 22 years? Instead, I finally stood up and walked to my car, the cool Colorado night air hitting my face like a slap. I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes before starting the engine, watching the darkened restaurant in my rearview mirror as I pulled away. The drive back to my apartment near campus passed in a blur of streetlights and late-night radio. I kept expecting the shock to wear off, for Dad's words to start making less sense or feeling less devastating. Instead, they seemed to settle deeper into my chest with each passing mile. Back in my small studio apartment, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and stared at my reflection. Same brown hair, same green eyes, same face I'd been looking at for 22 years. But something fundamental had shifted, like I was seeing myself through different eyes for the first time. I thought about all the family dinners where Chloe's achievements took center stage, all the conversations where my contributions felt like footnotes to her main narrative, all the times I'd felt like I was auditioning for a role in my own family. I'd always attributed it to natural sibling dynamics, the way older children sometimes shine brighter in parents' eyes. But now I wondered if it had been something else entirely. Something more deliberate and painful than I'd ever allowed myself to consider. I changed into pajamas and climbed into bed, but sleep felt impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again, saw the strange relief on his face as he spoke those words. Like he'd been carrying this truth around for years, and had finally found a moment to set it down. Your sister is my real pride and joy. I grabbed my laptop and opened it, the screen lighting up my dark apartment. For a moment, I just stared at the empty search bar, trying to find words for what I was feeling. Then I started typing, fingers moving almost without conscious thought. Signs of parental favoritism in families. The search results flooded the screen, article after article about golden children and scapegoats, about the long-term psychological effects of unequal treatment, about families where love comes with conditions and rankings. I read until my eyes burned, absorbing information that felt like it was describing my life with clinical precision. The preferential treatment, the different standards, the way achievements were celebrated or minimized depending on which child accomplished them. One article mentioned something called parentification, where one child becomes responsible for managing the family's emotional needs while the other is protected and elevated. Another discussed how unfavored children often become hyper-responsible, constantly trying to earn love that's freely given elsewhere. By the time dawn started creeping through my windows, I had filled a notebook with observations and memories, patterns I'd never connected before. The way Dad's voice changed when he talked about Chloe's future versus mine. How her problems became family emergencies while mine were character-building opportunities. The subtle ways I'd been trained to make myself smaller, so she could shine brighter. I closed the laptop and lay back against my pillows, exhaustion finally beginning to outweigh the adrenaline of discovery. But even as sleep started to pull me under, one thought remained crystal clear. This wasn't going to be another family secret I pretended not to know. This wasn't something I was going to smile through and brush aside. Dad had whispered those words, thinking they would put me in my place, make me accept a smaller role in the story of our family. Instead, they had given me something I'd never had before: absolute clarity about who I was dealing with and what I needed to do next. The silence I'd kept for 22 years was about to end. I woke up 3 days later feeling like I'd been living underwater. The semester was ending, finals looming, but I couldn't concentrate on anything, except the weight of Dad's words pressing against my chest every time I tried to breathe normally. I'd been going through the motions of normal life while something fundamental had shifted inside me, like a building where someone had moved all the load-bearing walls overnight. My roommate Nadia had left early for summer break, so the dorm room felt cavernous and echo-prone. I'd been grateful for the solitude at first, but now the silence was becoming oppressive. Every small sound seemed amplified: the refrigerator humming, footsteps in the hallway, the distant laughter of students who weren't questioning everything they thought they knew about their families. I was sitting at my desk, staring at an economics textbook without reading a single word, when my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Coffee later? I have news to share." The exclamation point felt like a tiny knife. Everything about her communication style suddenly seemed different when filtered through what Dad had told me. The easy enthusiasm, the assumption that I'd be available and interested, the way she never seemed to question whether she was the center of everyone's universe. I typed back, "Can't today, studying for finals," and immediately felt guilty for the lie. But I wasn't ready to sit across from her at some trendy Denver cafe, pretending to be excited about whatever success she wanted to celebrate while my entire understanding of our relationship was still raw and bleeding. Instead, I found myself driving back to Riverside without any clear plan. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of late spring day when the mountains looked close enough to touch, and the air carried the promise of summer. Under normal circumstances, it would have been the kind of day that made me grateful to live in Colorado. Today, it just felt like weather. I parked outside the Mountain View Bistro and sat in my car for several minutes, watching the lunch crowd through the wide front windows. The restaurant looked exactly the same as it had 3 days ago, but I felt like I was seeing it through different eyes. The careful staging, the way everything was designed to project warmth and success, the family photos on the walls that told a story I was beginning to question. Mrs. Cross was leaving as I approached the entrance, carrying a takeout bag and squinting against the afternoon sun. She'd been our neighbor for as long as I could remember, one of those people who seemed to know everything about everyone in Riverside while somehow never being gossipy about it. "Zoe, honey," she said, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "What a lovely surprise. How are you feeling after your big celebration?" "Good, thank you. The party was really nice." She studied my face with the kind of attention that made me suddenly self-conscious. Mrs. Cross had a way of seeing things that other adults missed, like she was tuned to a frequency most people couldn't access. "You know, dear, if you ever want to talk about anything, I'm always available. Sometimes it helps to have someone outside the family to listen." The offer was so gentle and unexpected that I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Cross. That's really kind." "I mean it, Zoe. Sometimes families can be complicated, even when they love each other very much." She squeezed my arm briefly before walking away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk wondering if everyone could see the cracks in our family portrait except me. Inside the restaurant, the lunch rush was winding down. Dad was at his usual table, laptop open, probably working on the quarterly reports he always stressed about. He looked up when I approached, surprise flickering across his features. "Zoe, what brings you by? Shouldn't you be studying?" "I needed a break from campus, thought I'd grab some lunch." "Of course, sweetheart. Sit wherever you'd like. I'll have Maria bring you a menu." The easy warmth in his voice made me feel dizzy. It was the same tone he'd used at my birthday party. The same fatherly affection I'd grown up with. If I hadn't heard those whispered words myself, I might have convinced myself I'd imagined them. I chose a table near the window, far enough from Dad's workspace to avoid conversation but close enough to observe him. Maria, one of the longtime servers, brought me iced tea and the lunch menu, chatting briefly about how proud everyone was of my academic success. Her kindness felt surreal, like she was talking about someone else entirely. "Your father never stops bragging about his girls," she said with a smile. "Both so accomplished, so different, but both special in your own ways." I nodded and smiled, but her words felt hollow. Did Dad really brag about me, or was that just polite conversation? How would Maria know the difference between genuine pride and obligatory parental performance? While I picked at a salad I didn't want, I watched Dad work. He had this focused intensity when he was dealing with business matters, the same concentration I'd seen him apply to everything from restaurant logistics to my homework when I was younger. There was something admirable about his dedication, his ability to build something successful from nothing. But now I found myself wondering about the cost of that success. What had he sacrificed to create this image of the perfect family, the thriving business, the respected place in the community? And more importantly, what had he expected us to sacrifice? My phone rang, startling me out of my observations. Aunt Patty's name appeared on the screen, and I answered before I could second-guess myself. "Zoe, honey, how are you doing? I've been thinking about you since the party." "I'm okay, Aunt Patty. Just trying to get through finals." "Are you sure? You seem a little distant lately. Is everything all right at home?" Something in her tone made me pause. There was a carefulness there, like she was choosing her words deliberately. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, you know. Family dynamics can be tricky sometimes. I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." I glanced over at Dad, who was now on a phone call, gesturing animatedly about something. "Aunt Patty, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Did you notice anything different about how Dad treats me and Chloe?" The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd lost connection. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentler than before. "Zoe, that's a complicated question. Why don't you come visit me this weekend? We can talk properly, away from distractions. I can't really leave campus right now with finals and everything. After finals, then. Promise me you'll come see me soon. There are some things about your family that might be easier to discuss in person." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. "What kind of things?" "Nothing that can't wait a few weeks." "But Zoe? Trust your instincts, okay? You're smarter and stronger than you give yourself credit for." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, trying to decode the subtext in Aunt Patty's words. She knew something. The careful way she'd spoken, the gentle probing, the invitation to visit, it all suggested she'd been waiting for me to start asking questions. "Everything okay over here?" Dad's voice startled me. He'd finished his call and was standing beside my table, looking down at me with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Fine. Just Aunt Patty checking in." "That's nice of her. She's always been fond of you girls." He slid into the seat across from me without invitation. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night." My heart started beating faster. "Which conversation?" "About being proud of you. I want to make sure you know that's genuine, Zoe. Sometimes I worry I don't express these things well enough." I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the man who'd whispered those devastating words at my birthday party. But all I saw was the father I'd grown up with, the one who'd helped with homework and attended school plays and taught me to drive in the parking lot behind the restaurant. "I know you love me, Dad." "Good, because I do. You and your sister both, in your own unique ways." The phrase "in your own unique ways" lodged itself in my throat like a fishbone. It sounded reasonable, even thoughtful, but something about the construction of it felt defensive, like he was building plausible deniability into his affection. "What do you mean by that?" He leaned back slightly, his expression shifting into something more calculated. "Well, you and Chloe have different strengths, different paths. It's natural that a parent would connect with those differences in various ways. Various ways. Exactly. Chloe has always been more ambitious, more driven toward creative success. You've always been more practical, more focused on stability. Both are valuable, just different. I felt something cold settling in my stomach. The way he was categorizing us, reducing our entire personalities to simple descriptors that coincidentally justified treating us differently. Chloe was ambitious and creative, therefore worthy of investment and excitement. I was practical and stable, therefore worthy of basic care but not genuine enthusiasm. I should probably get back to studying, I said, standing up more abruptly than I'd intended. Of course. Don't let me keep you from your responsibilities. Responsibilities, not dreams or passions or exciting opportunities. Responsibilities. I drove back to Denver with those words echoing in my head, along with Aunt Patty's carefully measured responses and Mrs. Cross's gentle offer of support. The pieces of something larger were beginning to take shape, but I couldn't quite see the full picture yet. That evening, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. Going through old family photos stored on my laptop. Digital albums from birthdays, graduations, family vacations, holiday celebrations. I scrolled through them systematically, looking for patterns I might have missed. What I found was subtle but undeniable once I started paying attention. In group photos, Chloe was almost always positioned centrally, with better lighting, more prominent placement, individual shots of her vastly outnumbered individual shots of me. Even in pictures where I was supposed to be the focus, my high school graduation, my acceptance to Denver State, somehow Chloe managed to be the most visually compelling person in the frame. More telling were the captions Dad had written on the photos he'd posted to social media over the years. Chloe's achievements were described in glowing, detailed language. So proud of my talented daughter's art exhibition opening tonight. Her vision and dedication continued to amaze me. My achievements were acknowledged more briefly. Congratulations to Zoe on another great semester. Hard work pays off. The difference was stark once I started looking for it. It was in the adjectives he chose, the length of the descriptions, the level of enthusiasm he projected. Chloe was talented, visionary, amazing. I was hardworking, responsible, steady. I closed the laptop and walked to my small kitchen, needing something to do with my hands. As I made tea, I found myself thinking about all the times I'd felt like I was disappointing Dad without understanding why. Good grades weren't good enough if they weren't excellent. Excellent grades weren't exciting if they were in practical subjects rather than creative ones. Even when I succeeded, it felt like I was succeeding in the wrong ways, on the wrong scale, with the wrong kind of ambition. I had spent years trying to figure out what I was doing wrong, how I could earn the kind of enthusiastic approval that seemed to flow so naturally toward Chloe. Now I was beginning to understand that the problem wasn't my performance. The problem was that I'd been auditioning for a role that was never going to be available to me. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Missed you at coffee today. The news I wanted to share is that the Denver Gallery wants to represent me exclusively. Dad's taking me to dinner tomorrow to celebrate. Rain check on catching up?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "That's wonderful news. Congratulations." But as I typed the words, I felt something shifting inside me. The automatic supportiveness, the reflexive enthusiasm for her success, the immediate willingness to celebrate her achievements while minimizing my own feelings. All of it was beginning to feel less natural and more performative. I spent the next few days finishing my final exams in a strange, emotional fog. The academic material felt trivial compared to the family revelations that were reorganizing themselves in my mind. I went through the motions of test-taking and paper writing, but part of me was constantly processing the implications of what I was learning about my place in the Harper family hierarchy. My economics professor, Dr. Martinez, pulled me aside after my final exam. "Zoe, is everything all right? Your performance this semester has been excellent as always, but you seem distracted lately." "Just family stuff, Dr. Martinez. Nothing too serious." She studied my face with the kind of attention that reminded me of Mrs. Cross. Family dynamics can be more impactful than we sometimes realize, especially during transitional periods like college. "If you need someone to talk to, my door is always open." Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean it. Sometimes an outside perspective can be helpful when we're too close to a situation to see it clearly. Walking back to my dorm, I reflected on how many adults had offered to listen in the past week. Mrs. Cross, Aunt Patty, Dr. Martinez. People who knew me well enough to sense something was wrong but weren't invested in maintaining the family narrative that everything was fine. That night, I made a decision. I was going to visit Aunt Patty as soon as finals were over. Whatever she knew about our family dynamics, whatever insights she'd been carefully not sharing, I needed to hear them. I was tired of feeling like everyone around me could see something I was missing. I was also going to start documenting things more systematically. Not just memories and observations, but concrete examples of the differential treatment I was beginning to recognize. If I was going to challenge the family narrative, I needed evidence that went beyond my subjective feelings. But most importantly, I was going to stop pretending that Dad's whispered words at my birthday party had been some kind of temporary emotional lapse. They had been a glimpse behind the carefully constructed facade of equal parental love, and I needed to understand what else had been hidden there. The semester ended on a Friday afternoon with my last final exam. As I walked across campus toward my car, I felt the strange combination of relief and dread that comes with completing one phase of life and preparing to enter another. Summer break stretched ahead of me, 3 months when I'd normally be working at the restaurant, spending time with family, enjoying the slower pace of life in Riverside. Instead, I was planning to use those 3 months to finally understand the truth about my family, starting with a conversation with Aunt Patty that I suspected was going to change everything I thought I knew about the Harper family dynamics. I drove back to Riverside that evening, watching the familiar mountains grow larger as I approached home. But for the first time in my life, the sight of those peaks didn't fill me with the comfort of returning to where I belonged. Instead, they looked like barriers I was going to have to find a way to climb. The house was quiet when I arrived. Dad was still at the restaurant, and there was a note on the kitchen counter saying he'd left dinner in the refrigerator for me. The gesture was thoughtful, typically considerate, the kind of thing that had always made me feel cared for. Tonight, it just made me wonder what the gesture was supposed to accomplish, what role it was designed to reinforce. The dutiful daughter arriving home to the practical care provided by the responsible parent. Nothing exciting or enthusiastic, just the basic maintenance of family obligations. I ate the leftover pasta standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at the backyard where Mom used to garden. Her flower beds were still there, maintained by a landscaping service Dad hired after she died. They looked perfect, professionally tended, but somehow lifeless compared to the slightly chaotic abundance she used to cultivate. Later, lying in my childhood bedroom surrounded by the artifacts of my adolescence, I thought about all the ways our family had been carefully maintained since Mom's death. Everything looked right from the outside, functioned properly, met the basic requirements of family life. But something essential was missing, some animating spirit that had died with her and never been replaced. I wondered if that something had been her ability to see me clearly, to love me for who I actually was rather than for how well I performed my designated role. And I wondered if Dad's whispered confession at my birthday party had been his way of finally admitting that without her balancing perspective, he'd been free to arrange his daughters according to his own preferences, rather than trying to love us equally. As I drifted toward sleep, one thought crystallized with uncomfortable clarity. I was 22 years old, and I was just beginning to understand that I'd been living someone else's version of my life. The question now was whether I had the courage to start living my own version instead. The drive to Denver felt longer than usual, every mile giving me more time to second-guess my decision to visit Aunt Patty. 3 weeks had passed since finals ended. 3 weeks of working at the restaurant and pretending everything was normal, while Dad celebrated Chloe's gallery representation with the kind of pride I'd never seen him display for any of my accomplishments. I'd watched him tell the story to customers, to business associates, to anyone who would listen. His face would light up in this particular way when he talked about Chloe's artistic talent, her bright future, the validation of having a daughter whose work was deemed worthy of professional representation. It was the expression of a man whose investment had paid off exactly as he'd hoped. When customers asked about me, he'd mention my academic success with the same tone most people use to discuss the weather. Pleasant, appropriate, but lacking any real emotional investment. Zoe's doing well at Denver State, he'd say, then immediately pivot to discussing menu specials or weekend events at the restaurant. Aunt Patty lived in a renovated Victorian house in the Highlands neighborhood, painted sage green with white trim and surrounded by the kind of abundant garden that Mom used to admire. I'd always loved visiting here as a child, drawn to the slightly bohemian atmosphere that felt so different from our more conventional home in Riverside. She answered the door wearing paint-splattered jeans and a flowing tunic, her graying brown hair pulled back in a messy bun that somehow looked elegant rather than disheveled. Mom's sister had always been the artistic one in their family, supporting herself through freelance graphic design and photography, while never quite settling into traditional adult expectations. "Zoe, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like jasmine and coffee. "I'm so glad you decided to come. I was beginning to worry you'd talked yourself out of it." "I almost did," I admitted, following her through the house toward her kitchen. The walls were covered with an eclectic mix of artwork, family photographs, and vintage posters that created a warm, slightly overwhelming visual tapestry. "Tea or coffee?" "I have both brewing." "Coffee, please." "I didn't sleep much last night." She poured coffee into 2 ceramic mugs, each one obviously handmade and slightly imperfect in the way that suggested they'd been chosen for character rather than uniformity. We settled at her kitchen table, which was positioned to catch the afternoon light streaming through windows that overlooked her backyard garden. "So," she said, wrapping her hands around her mug and studying my face with the same intensity I remembered from childhood, "what's been weighing on your mind?" I'd rehearsed this conversation during the drive, but now that I was here, the words felt inadequate. How do you explain to someone that you're questioning the fundamental structure of your family relationships without sounding paranoid or ungrateful? I've been thinking a lot about family dynamics lately, about how Dad treats me and Chloe differently. Patty nodded slowly, her expression shifting into something more serious. "What specifically have you been noticing?" It's hard to explain without sounding petty. It's not like he's cruel to me or anything. It's more subtle than that. Subtle doesn't mean imaginary, Zoe. Sometimes the most damaging patterns are the ones that are hardest to name. I took a sip of coffee, using the time to gather my thoughts. At my birthday party last month, Dad said something to me. Something that made me realize I might have been misunderstanding our family dynamic for years. What did he say? The words still felt sharp in my mouth, even weeks later. He told me that Chloe was his real pride and joy. Not both of us, just her. And that I needed to understand my place in the family. Patty's face went very still. She set down her mug carefully, like she was afraid of breaking it. "He said that to you at your birthday party?" Quietly. No one else heard. It was like he'd been waiting for the right moment to tell me something he'd been thinking for a long time. "Oh, honey." Her voice was soft, but there was something underneath it that sounded like anger. I was hoping I was wrong about some things, but that confirms what I've been observing for years. "What do you mean?" She stood up and walked to one of her kitchen drawers, pulling out a small wooden box that looked like it had been stored carefully for a long time. "Your mother left some things with me before she died. Letters, photographs, some recordings she made on her phone. She was worried about how Marcus was treating you girls, the different expectations he had." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of recordings?" "Conversations between her and Marcus about you and Chloe. Your mother was documenting patterns she was seeing, trying to understand whether she was overreacting or if there was really something problematic happening." Patty opened the box and pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind journalists used to use before smartphones made them obsolete. "She gave me this about 6 months before she died. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should make sure you heard these when you were old enough to understand them." "She thought something might happen to her?" "Your mother was sick for longer than anyone knew, Zoe. She had time to think about what she wanted to protect you from, what she wanted to make sure you understood about your family." She placed the recorder on the table between us. "Are you ready to hear this?" I stared at the small device, knowing that whatever was on it would change things irreversibly. What's on there? Conversations between your parents about their expectations for you and Chloe. Arguments about college funding. About whose achievements deserved celebration. About what kind of support each of you should receive. Your mother was trying to advocate for equal treatment, and Marcus was being very clear about his preferences. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, like the walls were pressing closer. He preferred Chloe. Dramatically. And your mother was fighting him on it, trying to protect you from understanding how blatant his favoritism was becoming. I reached for the recorder with trembling fingers. How long has this been going on? Based on these recordings? At least since you were in high school. Maybe longer. The device was surprisingly light, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. Will you listen with me? Of course, sweetheart. We can stop anytime you need to. I pressed play, and suddenly Mom's voice filled the kitchen, clear and familiar and heartbreaking. She was talking to Dad about college applications, and I could hear the strain in her voice as she tried to remain diplomatic while advocating for something he clearly didn't want to consider. Marcus, Zoe's grades are just as good as Chloe's were at this age. She deserves the same opportunities, the same level of support. Dad's voice was cooler, more dismissive than I'd ever heard it. Diana, they're different kids with different strengths. Chloe has artistic talent that's worth investing in. Zoe is smart, but she doesn't have that special something that's going to set her apart. She's 17 years old. How can you already be writing off her potential? I'm not writing it off. I'm being realistic about where our resources should go for maximum impact. Chloe's going to do something significant with her life. Zoe will be fine with a state school education and a practical career. Mom's voice got sharper, more frustrated. You talk about them like they're investments rather than your daughters. Everything's an investment, Diana. The question is whether you're investing wisely or throwing money away on sentiment. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking so hard I could barely manage the controls. Aunt Patty reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. I'm sorry, honey. I know this is hard to hear. There's more? Several hours worth. Your mother recorded conversations over the course of about 6 months, trying to document the pattern she was seeing. I felt nauseous. What else did he say? Do you want to hear more right now? Or do you need a break? I looked around Patty's warm kitchen, at the artwork on the walls and the plants on the windowsill, and the evidence of a life lived according to personal values rather than external expectations. I want to hear it all. I need to understand what was really happening. She nodded and gestured toward the recorder. There's one conversation that I think you particularly need to hear. It was recorded about 2 months before your mother died, during one of their arguments about your college choices. I fast-forwarded through several minutes of recording until I found Mom's voice again, this time more strained, like she'd been having this argument for a long time. You're setting up a dynamic that's going to damage both of them, Marcus. Chloe's going to grow up thinking she's inherently more valuable, and Zoe's going to spend her life trying to earn love that should be unconditional. That's melodramatic, Diana. I love both my daughters. You love them differently, and children can sense that, even when you think you're being subtle about it. Chloe has more potential. It's that simple. She's charismatic, talented, ambitious. Those are qualities that lead to success in life. And what about kindness? What about empathy? What about the way Zoe takes care of everyone around her without expecting anything in return? Those are nice qualities, but they don't build careers or create legacies. So you've decided that Chloe gets to be the star, and Zoe gets to be the supporting character in your family story. There was a long pause before Dad responded, and when he did, his voice had the same tone he'd used when he whispered to me at my birthday party. Zoe will be happier if she understands her role clearly rather than chasing something she's not equipped to achieve. I'm doing her a favor by managing her expectations. Mom's voice was barely controlled when she replied, You're not managing her expectations, Marcus. You're limiting her possibilities because it's convenient for your narrative about which daughter deserves your full investment. I stopped the recording again, this time because I was crying too hard to focus on the words. Aunt Patty moved her chair closer and put her arm around my shoulders. Your mother loved you so much, Zoe. She fought for you in ways you never knew about. Why didn't she tell me any of this while she was alive? She was trying to protect you. She hoped she could change his mind, get him to see how harmful his favoritism was becoming. She didn't want you to have to carry the burden of knowing how your father really felt until you were old enough to handle it. But she died before she could change anything. Yes. And I think she knew toward the end that her time was running out, which is why she wanted to make sure you'd eventually hear these conversations. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, trying to process the implications of what I'd learned. How long have you known about this? I suspected for years, but I didn't have proof until your mother gave me these recordings. And I wasn't sure how or when to share them with you. I was waiting for you to start questioning things yourself. The birthday party comment. That was probably him finally feeling free to be explicit about something he'd been thinking for a long time. With your mother gone, there was no one left to challenge his version of the family hierarchy. I thought about the past 3 years since Mom's death, all the times I'd felt like I was missing something important about family dynamics, all the moments when Dad's responses to my achievements had felt oddly muted compared to his enthusiasm for Chloe's successes. There's something else, Patty said gently. Something your mother discovered about the college funding that I think you should know about. What do you mean? She reached into the box again and pulled out a folder filled with financial documents. Your parents had education savings accounts set up for both of you girls. Equal amounts, meant to cover 4 years of college wherever you chose to go. I know about those accounts. Dad used mine for Denver State. That's what he told you. But according to these statements your mother copied, he transferred most of your education fund into Chloe's account to pay for her art school tuition and living expenses. The words hit me like ice water. What? You were supposed to have enough saved to attend any college you wanted, just like Chloe. Instead, he moved your money to ensure she could have the full art school experience without taking on any debt. I stared at the bank statements, trying to process what I was seeing. Numbers that showed my education fund being systematically depleted to supplement Chloe's already substantial college account. So when he told me I needed to be practical about college choices because money was tight, he was lying. The money was there, he'd just decided to spend it on your sister instead. But why would he do that? Quote, because in his mind, Chloe's education was an investment that would pay dividends, and yours was just an expense to be minimized. I felt like the ground was shifting underneath me. Not only had Dad been emotionally favoring Chloe for years, he'd been systematically disadvantaging me financially while making it seem like it was just the natural result of family circumstances. Your mother found out about the money transfers about a month before she died, Patty continued. That's when she recorded the angriest conversation on here. She was planning to confront him about it more directly, but she got sicker before she had the chance. Can I hear that conversation? Are you sure? It's pretty intense. I nodded, even though every revelation was making me feel more unsteady. Patty fast-forwarded to another section of the recording, and soon Mom's voice filled the kitchen again, this time with an edge of fury I'd rarely heard from her. I know about the college accounts, Marcus. I know what you did. I made a practical decision based on each girl's needs and potential. You stole from one daughter to give extra advantages to the other. That's not parenting, that's favoritism, so extreme it borders on financial abuse. Don't be dramatic, Diana. Zoe will get a perfectly good education at a state school. That's not the point. The point is that you made that choice for her without consulting her or me, based on your personal preferences rather than what's fair or right. Life isn't fair, and I'm preparing both girls for that reality in age-appropriate ways. By ensuring that one of them gets every advantage, while the other gets told she should be grateful for less? By ensuring that our family resources go where they'll have the most impact. And you've decided that Zoe inherently has less impact potential than Chloe. I've decided that Chloe has the kind of talent and drive that justifies significant investment, while Zoe has the kind of steady reliability that will serve her well in a more conventional path. You're destroying their relationship with each other and with you, and you don't even care as long as your golden child shines bright enough to reflect well on you. The recording ended abruptly, like Mom had turned off the device. I sat in Patty's kitchen staring at the financial documents, trying to understand how thoroughly I'd been manipulated without realizing it. Zoe, Patty said softly, I want you to know that your mother was planning to fix this. She'd started the process of legally challenging the account transfers, trying to restore your education fund. But she died before she could finish. Yes. And Marcus became the sole administrator of all family financial accounts. I thought about all the times over the past 3 years when I'd felt grateful to Dad for supporting my college education, all the moments when I'd tried to be understanding about the financial limitations he claimed we were facing. Meanwhile, he'd been sitting on knowledge that he'd deliberately created those limitations by redirecting my resources to Chloe. Does Chloe know about any of this? I doubt it. Your father wouldn't want to complicate her relationship with him by letting her know her advantages came at your expense. So she genuinely thinks she's just naturally more deserving of investment and support. Probably. Which isn't her fault, but it does mean she's been unconsciously participating in a family dynamic that's been fundamentally unfair to you. I stood up and walked to Patty's kitchen window, looking out at her garden while I tried to process everything I'd learned. The afternoon light was starting to fade, casting long shadows across the plants and flowers that Mom had always admired during our visits here. Aunt Patty, what am I supposed to do with all of this information? That's up to you, sweetheart. But I think you deserve to make decisions based on the truth, rather than the version of reality your father has been constructing. I don't know how to confront him about this without destroying what's left of our family. She joined me at the window, putting her hand on my shoulder. Sometimes families need to be disrupted in order to become healthier. Your mother understood that, which is why she was documenting all of this. But she's not here to help me figure out what comes next. No, but she left you tools to understand what was happening. And she trusted you to be strong enough to handle the truth when you were ready for it. I turned away from the window and looked around Patty's kitchen again, at the evidence of a life lived authentically rather than according to someone else's expectations. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could see a path forward that didn't involve pretending to be satisfied with the role Dad had assigned me. I need to think about all of this, I said finally. Of course, take as much time as you need. She handed me a small box. These are copies of everything your mother left with me. The recordings, the financial documents, some letters she wrote to you that she wanted you to have someday. Letters? Messages about who she saw you becoming, what she hoped for your future, how proud she was of your character and your potential. She wanted to make sure you heard her voice telling you those things, even if she couldn't be there to say them in person. I held the box carefully, understanding that it contained not just evidence of Dad's favoritism, but also proof of Mom's love and faith in me. Thank you for keeping all of this safe. It's what she would have wanted. And Zoe? Whatever you decide to do with this information, remember that you don't have to accept the limitations other people try to place on your life. Your mother knew that, and she wanted to make sure you knew it too. The drive back to Riverside felt different than the morning journey to Denver. I had answers now. Concrete evidence that the patterns I'd been noticing weren't figments of my imagination or symptoms of sibling jealousy. Dad had been systematically favoring Chloe for years, not just emotionally but financially, while coaching me to be grateful for less, and to see that as natural rather than unfair. But along with the answers came a new set of questions. How do you rebuild a relationship with a parent once you understand how deliberately they've been limiting your possibilities? How do you interact with a sister who's been unconsciously benefiting from favoritism she doesn't even recognize? And most importantly, how do you start living according to your own potential, rather than the diminished expectations someone else has placed on your life? As I pulled into the driveway of our house in Riverside, I saw Dad's car in the garage and lights on in the kitchen. A month ago, I would have walked inside and acted like everything was normal, falling back into the familiar patterns of family interaction that kept everyone comfortable. Tonight, I sat in my car for several minutes, holding the box Aunt Patty had given me and trying to decide who I wanted to be when I walked through that door. The dutiful daughter who accepted her designated role, or someone brave enough to start demanding the truth about why that role had been assigned in the first place. I walked into the house carrying Mom's box like it contained explosives, which, in a way, it did. Dad was in the living room reading financial reports, the same methodical concentration he brought to all business matters. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, his face brightening with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "Zoe, how was your visit with Patty? I hope she's doing well." She's fine. We had a good talk. Something in my tone must have registered because his expression shifted slightly, becoming more alert. Everything okay? You seem a little tense. I stood in the doorway holding the box, studying his face and wondering how I'd never noticed the calculating quality behind his paternal warmth. Dad, I need to ask you about something. Of course. What's on your mind? The college savings accounts. Mine and Chloe's. His body went very still, but his expression remained carefully neutral. What about them? I know what you did. I know you transferred most of my education fund to pay for Chloe's art school expenses. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I watched as different emotions flickered across his face. Surprise, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned irritation, like I'd discovered something inconvenient rather than devastating. Where did you hear that? Does it matter where I heard it? Is it true? He set down his papers and leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same focus he used to evaluate business proposals. Zoe, sit down. Let's talk about this rationally. I'd rather stand. Fine. Yes, I moved some money between the accounts. It was a practical decision based on each of your educational needs. The casual way he admitted it, like it was a minor administrative detail rather than a fundamental betrayal, made my chest feel tight with anger. You stole my college fund. I optimized family resources. Chloe's art education required specialized programs that cost significantly more than a standard state university degree. It made sense to allocate funds where they would have the most impact. Without telling me, without asking me, you were 17 years old. Financial decisions aren't made by children, they're made by parents who understand the bigger picture. I gripped the box tighter, using it as an anchor against the dizzying feeling of having reality rewritten in real time. The bigger picture being that Chloe deserved more investment than I did. The bigger picture being that different people have different potentials, and responsible parents recognize those differences when making resource allocation decisions. Resource allocation. Like we were business units rather than his daughters. What if I had wanted to go to art school too? What if I had wanted the same opportunities you gave Chloe? But you didn't, did you? You chose a practical major at an affordable school. Which proves my assessment was correct. I chose those things because you told me they were the only financially viable options. I chose them because you made me believe we couldn't afford anything else. And you're getting an excellent education that will prepare you for a stable career. What's the problem? The problem. As if my entire understanding of family fairness being shattered could be reduced to a simple problem with an obvious solution. The problem is that you lied to me about our financial situation, while secretly funding Chloe's dreams, with money that was supposed to be mine. Money that was managed by me for the benefit of this family as a whole. Benefit of this family, or benefit of your favorite daughter? His face hardened. That's an ugly way to characterize a complex parental decision. Then help me understand the complexity. Explain to me how stealing from one child to give extra advantages to another child is anything other than favoritism. He stood up abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked our backyard. When he turned back to face me, his expression had shifted into something colder and more controlled. All right, Zoe, you want honesty? Here's honesty. Chloe has something special. Talent, charisma, the kind of spark that creates success in competitive fields. You don't. You're intelligent, hardworking, reliable. All excellent qualities that will serve you well in a conventional life. But you don't have that extra something that justifies high-risk investments. The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing with the precision of someone who'd thought about this calculation many times before. High-risk investments. Art careers are inherently risky. Most people who pursue them fail. But Chloe has the talent level that makes that risk worthwhile. Your strengths lie in different areas that are better served by practical educational choices. So you decided my future for me based on your assessment of my potential. I guided you toward choices that matched your abilities and personality. That's what good parents do. I felt something breaking apart inside me, Not just sadness, but a kind of crystallizing fury I'd never experienced before. Good parents don't steal from one child to benefit another. Good parents don't manipulate their children into accepting less by lying about family finances. I made strategic decisions based on long-term family welfare. You made strategic decisions based on which daughter you preferred. His composure finally cracked. Fine, yes. I prefer Chloe's company. I prefer her ambition, her creativity, her social skills. She's easier to be proud of because she does things that generate pride. You do things that generate stability. The admission hung in the air between us like smoke from an explosion. He'd finally said out loud what his whispered birthday confession had only hinted at, that his love for us wasn't equal, had never been equal, would never be equal. Thank you, I said quietly. Thank you? For finally being honest about how you really feel. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Zoe, that came out harsher than I intended. No, I think it came out exactly as you intended. I think you've been wanting to say that for years, and now you finally have. I love you both. You love us differently, and you've structured our entire family dynamic around that difference. Different kinds of love for different kinds of people. That's normal. Is it normal to transfer one child's college fund to the other child without telling anyone? Is it normal for adult children to interrogate their parents about private financial decisions made in the family's best interest, when those decisions involve theft and deception? Yes, I think interrogation is pretty normal. He walked back to his chair and sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 53 years. Where is this coming from, Zoe? This anger, this confrontational attitude. It's not like you. Maybe the old me was just who I thought you wanted me to be. Quiet, grateful, accepting whatever you decided was appropriate for my level of worth. That's not fair. Fair. I laughed, but it didn't sound like amusement. You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about Mom trying to advocate for equal treatment and you dismissing her concerns because they interfered with your preference for Chloe. His face went white. How do you know about those conversations? She recorded them. Hours of conversations where she begged you to treat your daughters equally and you explained why that wasn't worth your effort. She? What? I opened the box and pulled out the digital recorder, setting it on the coffee table between us. She documented everything. The money transfers, the differential treatment, the way you talked about us when you thought no one would ever hold you accountable. He stared at the device like it was a snake coiled to strike. Patty had no right to give you those recordings. Mom had every right to make them, and she had every right to want me to understand what was really happening in this family. Your mother was sick, emotional. She wasn't thinking clearly about family dynamics. She was thinking clearly enough to notice that you were systematically favoring one daughter over the other while pretending to love us equally. I do love you equally. You love us differently. You said so yourself. You prefer Chloe's company. You prefer her achievements. You prefer investing in her future. That's not equal love. That's ranked love. He stood up again and began pacing, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I'd seen him use when business deals weren't going according to plan. This is getting out of hand. You're twisting normal parental decision-making into some kind of conspiracy against you. Normal parental decision-making doesn't involve transferring one child's college savings to benefit the other child. I was managing limited resources in a way that maximized benefit for the family as a whole, by your definition of benefit, which prioritized Chloe's dreams over mine. Because her dreams had more potential for success, according to your assessment, which you made without consulting me about what my dreams even were. He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. Fine. Tell me now, what were your dreams that were so important that I should have prioritized them over Chloe's obvious talent? The question was clearly meant to trap me, to force me to admit that I'd never had ambitions worth the kind of investment he'd made in Chloe. But instead of feeling defensive, I felt a strange kind of clarity. I wanted to study environmental law. I wanted to work on climate policy, maybe for the EPA or a major environmental organization. But when I researched those programs, they were all expensive, competitive, at schools you told me we couldn't afford. His expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. "You never mentioned environmental law. Because every time I brought up expensive graduate programs or competitive fields, you redirected me toward more practical options. You taught me that my role in this family was to be realistic and grateful, not ambitious and demanding. Environmental law is a difficult field to break into. So is fine art. But you didn't discourage Chloe from pursuing difficult creative fields. That's different. Because she's your favorite. Because she has demonstrable talent in her chosen field. And you never gave me the chance to demonstrate talent in mine because you decided in advance that I didn't have any worth investing in." He sat back down, looking deflated. "Zoe, I'm sorry if my decision-making made you feel undervalued. That wasn't my intention. Your intention was to allocate family resources according to your personal preferences while making me believe those allocations were based on objective financial necessity. My intention was to set both of you up for success according to your different strengths and potentials, by giving Chloe every advantage and teaching me to be satisfied with less, by being realistic about what each of you could achieve with the resources we had available, resources that you redistributed without telling me." I picked up the recorder again. "Should I play the conversation where Mom confronted you about the money transfers, where you admitted you were stealing from me to give Chloe extra advantages?" "Don't. Why not? Don't you want to hear how you explained to Mom that I inherently deserved less investment than Chloe?" "Zoe, please." "Please what? Please pretend I never found out. Please go back to being grateful for whatever scraps of attention and resources you felt like sharing. Please don't destroy this family over financial decisions that were made with good intentions." "Good intentions?" I stood up, still holding the recorder. "Your good intentions involved lying to me about our financial situation, stealing my college fund, and systematically conditioning me to accept that I was worth less investment than my sister. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. And the only reason you're uncomfortable now is because I finally have proof of what you did." He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the warm paternal concern he usually performed, but something desperate and calculating. "What do you want, Zoe? An apology? I'll apologize. More money for graduate school? We can discuss that. But this confrontational approach isn't helping anyone. I want you to admit that you've been lying about treating us equally. I want you to acknowledge that you deliberately disadvantaged me to benefit Chloe. And I want you to explain to me why you thought I deserved to grow up believing I was inherently worth less than my sister. I never said you were worth less. You didn't have to say it. You demonstrated it through every choice you made about how to invest in our futures. Investment decisions based on practical assessments of potential returns. Returns. I felt that crystallizing fury again, cleaner and more focused than before. Is that what we are to you? Investments with different expected returns? In a sense, yes. Parenting involves making strategic decisions about resource allocation based on the likelihood of various outcomes. And you decided that Chloe was likely to provide better returns on your investment than I was. I decided that Chloe's path had more potential for the kind of success that reflects well on family investment. Success that reflects well on you mean? He paused. Yes. Success that reflects well on me as a parent. Finally, the truth. Not dressed up in language about family welfare or practical decision-making, but the simple reality that he'd structured our family dynamic around which daughter was more likely to make him look good as a father. So when people ask about your daughters, you get to talk about Chloe's gallery representation and artistic success. And when they ask about me, you get to, what? Talk about how I'm reliably ordinary. You're not ordinary, Zoe. You're steady, dependable, the kind of person who creates stability in families and communities. The kind of person who makes a good supporting character in other people's stories. The kind of person who builds a solid life based on realistic expectations. Realistic expectations that you imposed on me by manipulating my financial options and conditioning me to believe I should be grateful for less. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up again, his expression had shifted into something that looked almost relieved. "You're right," he said simply. "What?" "You're right. I did favor Chloe. I did transfer money from your education fund to hers. I did structure family dynamics around her being the star and you being the responsible one. And I did it because I genuinely believed she had more potential for the kind of success I wanted to be associated with. The admission was so unexpected that I almost didn't know how to respond. Why are you telling me this now? Because you already know it. Because the evidence is sitting right there on that table. And because maybe it's time to stop pretending this family operates on principles of equality when it clearly doesn't. So what happens now? Now you decide what you want to do with this information. You can use it to justify cutting me out of your life. Or you can accept that families are imperfect systems where people make flawed decisions based on incomplete information and personal biases. Incomplete information? I made assumptions about your potential that may have been wrong. I structured opportunities around those assumptions in ways that may have been unfair. But I made those decisions based on what I observed about your personalities, your interests, your likely trajectories. And you never considered that my personality and interests might have been shaped by the opportunities you did or didn't provide. That's possible. It's not possible, it's certain. You taught me to be realistic and practical by limiting my options, and then used my realistic, practical choices as evidence that I was inherently less ambitious than Chloe. He nodded slowly. You're probably right about that too. So what are you going to do about it? What would you like me to do about it? The question hung between us. For weeks I'd been building toward this confrontation, imagining how satisfying it would feel to finally force him to admit his favoritism. But now that the admission had come, I felt oddly empty rather than vindicated. I want you to tell Chloe the truth about how her advantages were funded. His face tightened. That would damage her relationship with me and potentially with you. Her relationship with you is currently based on lies about family financial equity. And her relationship with me is based on her believing she naturally deserves more support than I do. Telling her about the money transfers wouldn't serve any constructive purpose. It would serve the purpose of honesty, something this family apparently struggles with. Honesty for the sake of honesty, even when it hurts people unnecessarily. Honesty for the sake of letting Chloe understand that her advantages came at my expense, so she can make informed decisions about how she wants to relate to both of us going forward. And if she decides she can't handle knowing that her education was partially funded by money that was meant for you, then she'll have to figure out how to handle it. Just like I had to figure out how to handle discovering that my father systematically lied to me about our family's financial situation while stealing my college fund. We stared at each other across the living room, the digital recorder sitting between us like evidence in a trial that was finally reaching its verdict. I'll think about it, he said finally. No, you'll do it, or I will. Zoe, I'm done protecting other people from uncomfortable truths about this family. If you don't tell Chloe what you did, I'll tell her myself. And I'll play her the recordings where Mom tried to advocate for equal treatment, while you explained why I wasn't worth equal investment. That would destroy any chance of maintaining normal family relationships. We don't have normal family relationships. We have a family where one daughter gets advantages stolen from the other daughter while everyone pretends the allocation is natural and fair. He stood up and walked to the window again, his shoulders slumped with something that looked like defeat. What exactly do you want me to say to her? The truth. That you transferred most of my college savings to her account. That you lied to me about our financial limitations. That you've been systematically favoring her for years while conditioning me to accept less. And then what? What happens to this family after I destroy Chloe's trust and make her feel guilty about every advantage she's received? Then maybe we can start building relationships based on honesty instead of performance. Maybe Chloe can decide for herself how she wants to handle knowing that her privileges came at my expense. And maybe I can stop pretending to be grateful for a role you assigned me based on your personal preferences rather than my actual potential. And if the family falls apart completely? I picked up the box containing Mom's recordings and letters, holding it against my chest like armor. Then at least it will fall apart honestly, instead of continuing as a lie that benefits you and hurts me. He turned from the window to look at me, and for the first time in my life I saw something in his expression that looked like respect rather than dismissive affection. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. I'm exactly as strong as I always was. You just never bothered to notice because strength didn't fit the role you needed me to play. Fair enough. He walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. I'll talk to Chloe this weekend. All of it. The money transfers, the differential treatment, the conversations with Mom. All of it. All of it. I headed toward the stairs, then turned back. And Dad? After you talk to Chloe, we need to discuss how you're going to restore my education fund. Because I'm applying to environmental law programs for next year, and I'm going to need the money you stole from me to pay for them. I didn't wait for his response. I climbed the stairs to my room, still carrying Mom's box, feeling like I was walking away from a burning building I'd finally found the courage to escape. The week that followed our confrontation felt like living in a house made of glass, where everyone was afraid to move too quickly. Dad barely spoke to me beyond necessary logistics, and I could see him rehearsing conversations in his head, probably trying to figure out how to explain 25 years of favoritism to his golden child without completely destroying his relationship with her. I spent most of that time in my room, reading through Mom's letters and listening to recordings I hadn't had the courage to hear during my visit with Aunt Patty. Her voice filled my small space with a warmth I'd forgotten existed, reminding me of bedtime stories and weekend baking sessions, and the way she used to defend my choices when Dad questioned them. One letter, dated just 3 months before she died, hit me especially hard. My darling Zoe, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't able to fix what's been broken in our family dynamics. I want you to know that every day I watched your father diminish your light while amplifying Chloe's. I fought for you. Sometimes quietly, sometimes not so quietly. You are extraordinary in ways he refuses to see, and I need you to promise me that you won't let his limitations become your ceiling. You have your grandmother's fierce heart and your own unique brilliance. Don't let anyone convince you to make yourself smaller to accommodate their comfort. Love always, Mom. I was crying over those words when Chloe's car pulled into the driveway Saturday afternoon. Dad had texted her that morning asking her to come over for a family conversation, which probably sounded innocuous enough to ensure she'd show up without bringing Blake as a buffer. From my bedroom window, I watched her walk to the front door carrying a bakery box that probably contained Dad's favorite desserts. Even in casual weekend clothes, she moved with the kind of unconscious confidence that comes from never having to question whether you're welcome in a space. I envied that confidence even as I was preparing to shatter the worldview that had created it. 20 minutes later, Dad called up the stairs. Zoe, could you come down, please? Chloe's here. I took one last look at Mom's letter, folded it carefully, and went downstairs to join what felt like the most important conversation of my life. Chloe was sitting on the couch looking relaxed but slightly curious, probably wondering why Dad had requested a family meeting on a Saturday afternoon. She smiled when she saw me, the same warm expression that had always made me feel guilty for resenting her advantages. Hey, little sister. Dad says he has something important to discuss with both of us. Something like that, I replied, taking the chair across from her instead of sitting beside her on the couch. Dad remained standing, positioned near the fireplace like he was about to deliver a business presentation. Girls, there's something I need to tell you about family finances, and some decisions I made regarding your educations. Chloe's expression shifted slightly, becoming more alert. What kind of decisions? The kind that weren't entirely fair to both of you equally. I watched her face as Dad began explaining the college fund transfers, starting with careful language about resource optimization and strategic allocation. But as he continued, forced by my occasional sharp looks to be more specific, her expression changed from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like horror. Wait, she interrupted when he reached the part about transferring most of my savings to her account. You're saying my art school tuition was paid for with money that was supposed to be Zoe's? Part of it, yes. I made the decision to consolidate educational resources where they would have the most impact. Impact. She looked between Dad and me, her face pale. You stole from Zoe to pay for my school? I reallocated family resources based on practical assessments of potential outcomes. You stole from my sister. Her voice was getting sharper. And you let me believe that I was just naturally deserving of more educational support. You deserved the support you received based on your talent and potential. Potential that you measured how, exactly? She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you decided I was worth more investment and then created financial justifications for that preference. I felt a surge of gratitude toward her that caught me completely off guard. Whatever else happened in this conversation, she wasn't defending Dad's choices or making excuses for benefiting from them. Chloe, please sit down so we can discuss this rationally. Rationally? She turned from the window, and I was shocked to see tears in her eyes. You want to discuss rationally how you've been systematically lying to both of us about family dynamics for years? I was managing complex family resources in ways that… Stop! Her voice cut through his explanation with an authority I'd never heard from her before. Stop talking like we're business investments instead of your daughters. She moved to sit on the arm of my chair, putting her hand on my shoulder in a gesture that felt like solidarity rather than condescension. Zoe, how long have you known about this? I found out last week. There's more. More? I looked at Dad, giving him one last chance to tell the complete truth himself. When he remained silent, I continued. Mom recorded conversations between her and Dad about his favoritism. Hours of recordings where she tried to get him to treat us equally. And he explained why that wasn't worth his effort. Recordings. She left them with Aunt Patty, along with financial documents and letters. She wanted me to understand what was really happening in this family. Chloe's hand tightened on my shoulder. Can I hear them? Chloe, those recordings are taken out of context, Dad interrupted. Your mother was sick, emotional. She was interpreting normal parental decision-making through a lens of… Through a lens of what? Chloe's voice was ice cold. Expecting her daughters to be treated equally? Through a lens of idealistic expectations that didn't account for practical realities about resource management and individual potential assessment. Individual potential assessment, she repeated slowly. Is that what you call deciding one daughter is inherently worth more than the other? I call it recognizing different strengths and investing accordingly. By lying to Zoe about our financial situation, while secretly funding my advantages with her college money. By making strategic decisions based on long-term family welfare projections. Chloe laughed, but it sounded bitter. Family welfare? Whose welfare exactly? Because it seems like these strategic decisions primarily benefited me and disadvantaged Zoe, while you got to feel good about supporting the daughter whose success reflected better on your parenting. I stared at my sister, amazed by how quickly she'd identified the core dynamic that had taken me weeks to fully understand. You can see it that clearly? Now I can. Looking back at 25 years of family interactions through this lens, it's painfully obvious. She turned back to Dad. The different ways you responded to our achievements, the different levels of enthusiasm you showed for our futures, the way you always seemed more interested in my problems than hers. You girls had different needs, different personalities. It's natural that a parent would respond to those differences. Different needs, Chloe said flatly. Like my need for expensive art education funded by stealing Zoe's college savings? Like your demonstrated talent in competitive creative fields that justified higher levels of educational investment. Justified by what standard? Your personal preference for having an artistic daughter over a practical one? Dad's composure was starting to crack. Chloe, you're being unfairly reductive about complex parental calculations. I'm being honest about favoritism you've been disguising as practical decision-making. She stood up and walked back to the window, staring out at the backyard where Mom's flower beds were maintained in perfect, sterile condition. How long have you preferred me over Zoe? I don't prefer either of you. I love you both. Differently, I said quietly. You love us differently, and you've structured our entire family around that difference. Everyone loves different people differently, based on personality compatibility and shared interests. Personality compatibility, Chloe repeated. So you found me more compatible, and therefore more deserving of investment, attention, and financial support. I found you more likely to achieve the kind of success that would justify significant educational expenditure. Success that would make you look good as a father. He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, success that would reflect positively on family investment in educational opportunities. There it is, Chloe said softly, the truth. You invested more in me because you thought my success would make you look better. I invested more in you because your path showed more potential for exceptional outcomes. Exceptional outcomes that you could brag about at dinner parties and business meetings. Exceptional outcomes that justified the financial sacrifice required to support them. Financial sacrifice involving stealing from your other daughter. Financial reallocation involving strategic resource management across family educational priorities. Chloe turned back to us, and I saw something in her face that looked like grief. Do you hear yourself right now? The way you're talking about us like we're portfolio investments rather than your children? I'm talking about the practical realities of parenting in a world where resources are limited and decisions have to be made about how to allocate those resources effectively. Resources that weren't actually limited until you artificially limited them by stealing from one daughter to benefit the other. Resources that were strategically deployed to maximize positive outcomes for family educational investment. I watched this exchange feeling like I was seeing my sister clearly for the first time. Not as the golden child whose advantages came naturally, but as another person trying to understand how she'd been manipulated into a role she'd never consciously chosen. Chloe, I said quietly, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You didn't know about the money transfers or the recordings or any of it. But I benefited from it. I got advantages that were literally stolen from you while believing I naturally deserved more support. You deserved support. Just not at my expense. I should have questioned why my education was funded so differently than yours. I should have wondered why Dad always seemed more invested in my future than in yours. You were raised to think that was normal. We both were. She sat down on the couch, looking drained. I feel like I'm learning that my entire relationship with both of you has been based on lies. Not lies, Dad said, sitting down across from her. Incomplete information designed to protect both of you from unnecessary complexity about family financial management. Protect us, she said slowly. By lying to Zoe about why she couldn't afford better educational opportunities while lying to me about why I could. By managing information in ways that allowed both of you to focus on your studies, rather than worrying about family financial strategizing. By manipulating both of us into accepting roles you assigned based on your personal preferences. By providing structure and guidance appropriate to your different strengths and likely trajectories. Chloe looked at me, and I saw something in her expression that reminded me of Mom, a fierce protectiveness that I'd rarely seen directed toward me. What do you want to do about this, Zoe? I want Dad to restore my education fund so I can apply to environmental law programs. And I want us to start having honest relationships instead of performing the roles he's assigned us. Environmental law? Something I've wanted to pursue since high school, but I was conditioned to believe it wasn't financially viable for our family. Because Dad transferred your college money to pay for my art school. Because Dad decided your dreams were worth investing in and mine weren't. She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then she looked at Dad with an expression I'd never seen her direct toward him before. Not warm or admiring, but cold and analytical. Here's what's going to happen, she said in a voice that reminded me startlingly of Mom's tone when she was laying down non-negotiable rules. You're going to restore every penny you stole from Zoe's education fund with interest. You're going to support her environmental law applications the same way you supported my art school applications. And you're going to start treating us like equally valuable daughters instead of ranked investments. Chloe, that's not realistic, given current family financial. I don't care about current family finances. I care about you undoing the damage you've done by stealing from one daughter to benefit the other. The art school tuition has already been paid. That money has been spent on educational opportunities that can't be returned. Then you'll find other money. Sell something, liquidate investments, take out loans. I don't care how you do it, but you will restore what you stole. And if I refuse, then you'll lose both daughters instead of just losing control over them. Dad looked between us with something that might have been panic. You girls are overreacting to complex financial decisions that were made with good intentions. Good intentions don't excuse theft and manipulation, Chloe said firmly. And they don't excuse 25 years of conditioning Zoe to accept that she's worth less investment than I am. I never said she was worth less. You demonstrated it through every choice you made about resource allocation, attention distribution, and future planning. I demonstrated practical parenting based on realistic assessment of different potential outcomes. You demonstrated favoritism so extreme that you were willing to steal from one child to benefit the other while lying to both of us about what you were doing. I watched my father's face as he realized that both of his daughters were united against him for the first. Whatever divide-and-conquer strategy he'd been unconsciously employing was no longer working. "What exactly do you want from me?" he asked finally. "Accountability," Chloe said immediately. "Acknowledgement of the harm you've caused, and concrete steps to repair the damage. Starting with restoring my education fund," I added. "And ending with you learning to treat us as equally valuable people rather than ranked investments," Chloe continued. "And if I can't do those things, then you'll have to live with the consequences of choosing your comfort over your daughter's well-being," she replied. He was quiet for a long time, looking around the living room at the family photos that suddenly seemed like artifacts from a performance none of us were willing to continue staging. "I'll need time to figure out the financial logistics," he said finally. "You have 2 weeks," Chloe said. 2 weeks to restore Zoe's education fund and start treating us like equals. Or we'll make our own decisions about what kind of relationship we want to have with a parent who is willing to steal from one child to benefit another." After Chloe left that evening, the house felt different. Not just quiet, but hollow. Like a stage set after the play has ended and the actors have gone home. Dad disappeared into his study, probably trying to figure out how to restore my education fund without acknowledging that he'd destroyed it in the first place. I sat in my room reading more of Mom's letters, finding strength in her words about refusing to accept limitations other people tried to place on my life. One passage felt especially relevant. "Your father thinks love is a finite resource that has to be rationed based on who deserves it most. I know love is infinite, and every child deserves the full measure of their parents' support and belief. Don't let his limitations become your truth." 2 weeks later, Dad handed me a cashier's check for the full amount of my original education fund, plus interest calculated over the years since the transfers. He didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the wrongness of what he'd done, just presented the check like it was a business transaction that had been completed satisfactorily. "Thank you," I said, but it felt strange to thank someone for returning money they'd stolen from you. "I hope you'll use it wisely." "I'm sure you do." That fall, I started my first semester at UC Berkeley's environmental law program, living in a small apartment in Oakland that I'd chosen and furnished myself. For the first time in my life, I was pursuing something I genuinely wanted, rather than something that had been selected for me based on artificial limitations. Chloe and I talked regularly, building a relationship based on honesty rather than the roles Dad had assigned us. She'd started therapy to process growing up as the favored child, working through guilt about advantages she'd never requested and resentment about manipulation she'd never recognized. "I keep thinking about all the times I wondered why you seemed so resigned about your future," she told me during one of our weekly calls. "I thought you were just naturally more practical than me, but really you'd been conditioned to believe you weren't worth the same level of investment. And I thought you were just naturally more deserving of attention and support, but really you'd been positioned as the family star while I was positioned as the supporting character." It's insane how effectively he manipulated both of us without either of us recognizing what was happening. The scary part is how normal it felt. Like, of course, one daughter would get more resources and enthusiasm than the other. Our relationship with Dad remained complicated. He'd restored my education fund and made superficial efforts to treat us more equally, but he'd never acknowledged the fundamental wrongness of what he'd done, or shown genuine remorse for the harm it had caused. Family dinners became exercises in polite conversation rather than warm connection, everyone careful not to reference the history that had been exposed but never properly addressed. He'd lost the easy authority he'd once wielded, the assumption that his decisions were automatically in our best interests. The following spring, I was accepted into a summer internship with the EPA's Climate Policy Division in Washington, D.C. It was competitive, prestigious, exactly the kind of opportunity I'd never imagined pursuing when I thought my role was to be practical and grateful for conventional options. When I called to tell Dad about the internship, his response was measured and appropriate, but lacking the genuine enthusiasm I'd seen him show for Chloe's achievements throughout our childhood. "That's wonderful, Zoe. I'm proud of you. Thank you. I hope you'll represent our family well. represent our family. Even in congratulations, there was this undertone of expectation that my achievements were somehow reflections on him rather than accomplishments in their own right. "I'll represent myself well," I replied, which I think is what really matters. After we hung up, I sat in my Berkeley apartment looking out at the Bay Area skyline and thinking about how different my life looked now compared to what I'd imagined for myself just 1 year earlier. I was studying what I wanted to study, pursuing opportunities I'd never thought were available to me, building relationships based on honesty rather than performed gratitude. The girl who'd stood in that restaurant listening to her father whisper that her sister was his real pride and joy felt like someone I'd known a long time ago. Someone who'd been smaller, quieter, more willing to accept that other people's assessments of her value were more accurate than her own instincts about her potential. I thought about Mom's final letter, the one I'd read so many times the paper was soft with handling. "Promise me, you won't let his limitations become your ceiling." For 22 years, I'd lived under a ceiling constructed by Dad's preferences and prejudices, believing it was the natural height of my world. Now, sitting in my own apartment pursuing my own dreams with my own restored resources, I could see that the ceiling had always been artificial. Breaking my silence hadn't destroyed our family, as Dad had predicted. It had revealed what our family actually was beneath the performance of equality he'd been directing for decades. What remained was smaller, more honest, less warm but ultimately more real. Some relationships don't survive the truth, but the relationships that do survive become stronger, built on foundation of honesty, rather than the shifting sand of comfortable lies. I never got the apology I deserved, the acknowledgement of harm, the genuine remorse that might have rebuilt the trust that had been shattered. But I got something more valuable, the understanding that my worth wasn't determined by other people's willingness to recognize it, and my potential wasn't limited by other people's investment in my success. The silence I'd kept for 22 years had been broken, and in its place was something I'd never had before. My own voice, speaking my own truth, demanding my own space in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.